Now, um, there are three components in this particular illustration. The first one, I have already introduced you to the area called cardiogenic area. That is the area where the development of the heart tube is going to start. The endothelium here, as the first step in angiogenesis, is formed into two tubes running longitudinally. The primitive right and the primitive left heart tubes. I repeat, initially there are two heart tubes, right and the left heart tubes. The second photo, that is the middle photograph, with progress of time, in a few days, these two tubes fuse to form a single heart tube. It is now around this time that the third photograph begins to show that the whole thing is happening around the inside a cavity, namely the pericardial cavity. Now, after this is over, watch carefully more and more from now onwards, next few minutes, you will have tons of terminologies coming up. This heart tube not only grows and grows, but also starts looping. These are two things you must remember. It not only grows craniocaudally, not only fattens, becomes larger and larger, but it also starts looping all inside the pericardial cavity. Now, growth and looping is essential to give you the final definitive shape of the heart. Now you see, from one end to the other, you can see already the artist has given a color code. The lower half is slightly reddish, and the upper part is slightly bluish green. Although it doesn't seem to fit into any conventional color code, it gives us some hint that we are looking at some kind of an arterial end and a venous end of the body. You see, arterial and venous end of the body of the developing heart tube. So the one end here, the upper end, is the arterial end. The other end here down the blue color is the venous end. From the venous end to the arterial end, let's go from below upwards. See, this tube, now a single heart tube, shows a series of dilatations. I repeat, shows a series of dilatation. The first dilatation is the sinus venosus. I repeat, is the sinus venosus. Next dilatation is the atrium. After that, the ventricle. Then this whole thing complete is one single dilatation, bulbus cordis. I repeat, bulbus cordis. The bulbus cordis is the future arterial end of the heart. The sinus venosus is the future venous end of the heart. You see, we have already created a heart tube. We are noticing that it is developing into some dilatations, saculations. Each sac is representative of a future cavity of the heart. For example, the sinus venosus, that will be the ones that form your future superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, pulmonary veins, and a large part of the atrium, right atrium. The primitive atrium joins this sinus venosus. Together they form the final adult atrium. The primitive ventricle and the bulbus cordis, the lower part of the bulbus cordis, together they form the ventricular chambers, right and the left ventricles. And the upper part of the bulbus cordis, I repeat, the upper part of the bulbus cordis, labeled specially here as the truncus arteriosus, is the outflow regions of the heart. That means the part of the heart that will lead you, these are the vestibules that lead you respectively into the aorta and the pulmonary trunk. Now that outflow chambers, you will see the word infundibulum in a future discussion. They are all formed from this particular region. And finally, the aorta and the aortic roots, etc. So this is a very, very important opening slide in our understanding of the development of the heart. Next, the looping of the heart. As the tube lengthens and fattens, there is no place for this tube to remain longitudinal. See, it's like, when you go on folding a rubber band or, twisting a rubber band, a stage comes when it starts looping. Same thing here. This is the slide about which I gave you the details in the previous this thing. We'll just recapitulate what we talked of. Sinus venosus. This is the venous end of the heart. The sinus venosus actually is contributed by two branches. I won't say it divides, two branches join to form the sinus venosus. Now, the sinus venosus is formed by the left branch and the right branch, or left horn and the right horn of the sinus venosus. This is the left horn and this is the right horn. Whether it is right horn or the left horn, each sinus venosus is contributed by three veins. The common cardinal vein, umbilical vein, vitelline vein. I repeat, common cardinal. In the case of left, it is left common cardinal. Then the middle one is the left umbilical in this side. Similarly, the left vitelline. I repeat, right vitelline, right umbilical, right common cardinal. Left vitelline, left umbilical and left common cardinal veins. This is very important because these make further contributions to structures in the immediate vicinity of the heart as the sinus venosus is absorbed into the next chamber, the atrium. It is time to introduce between the two cavities the atrium and the ventricle. Remember, at this stage, this is a single heart tube. There are no two atria, there are no two ventricles. There is a single atrium, single ventricle. And for the first time, slowly the constriction in between the two shows some other developments. That will be the region of the future valves, you see, between the atrium and the ventricle. What valves? What valves are there between the atrium and the ventricle?
Atrioventricular.
Exactly. Can you specifically name them?
The bicuspid and the
Bicuspid and the mitral valve.
On the right side is the tricuspid valve. And on the left side is the mitral valve. So that is why we are heading towards that. Similarly, beyond the ventricle, you see, beyond the ventricle, there is an outflow chamber. I repeat, outflow chamber. This is the future region I mentioned, infundibulum, etc. And then the truncus arteriosus that forms the future aorta and the pulmonary trunk. Now it is time that this area also we introduce the next two valves, namely, what valves come in the outflow chamber of the heart across the outflow tract? Aortic valve and pulmonary valves. You see, aortic valve and pulmonary valves. Now, we started with a double heart tube, right heart tube and left heart tube. We saw that these two fuse to form a single heart tube. By the word single heart tube, I mean there is a single cavity. I repeat, I mean a single cavity lined with endothelium and covered with mesoderm, and that's what we have called it as a heart tube. In other words, at this stage, the heart looks like any other blood vessel, any other artery. Slowly, it shows dilatations when you begin to realize